Okay, so Intel is massive and they pour billions into R&D every year, and they're going to figure out the new 7nm chip and everything will be fine. That's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. No, I'm just kidding. This video is a beast. I have done hours upon hours of research, and I just have so many notes right here on my notepad, and this really is the ultimate Intel deep dive, so I hope you're ready. Plus, there's this tiny segment of Intel that's grown over 100% in revenue from 2018 to 2019 that will actually go toe-to-toe with Tesla that nobody's talking about, and I'm going to cover that later on in the video. But before we start, there's a lot of technical computer talk in this video, but I've simplified it as much as possible, so I hope it doesn't intimidate any new investors. Rather, I hope you guys take away something that goes into the thought process of picking a stock. But if you're kind of lost on all the nanometer, core count, clock speed talk, just try to look at the bigger picture of the information I'm presenting, and I still think you'll get a lot out of this video. Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Evan,
and this is the Financial Dominance YouTube channel.
Okay, so let's just address the $10 billion elephant in the room. Well, there's a couple elephants in the room, but we'll get to that later. $10 billion in stock buybacks. A stock buyback, for those of you who don't know, is when a company deems its stock price undervalued, and it buys back a portion of the company's shares and retires those shares, and it also makes the earnings per share on paper go up, which in turn makes all the remaining shares more valuable. In this video, I'm going to give you my Intel stock analysis and bull case, and why I agree with Intel in the fact that I also think this stock is undervalued and is still undervalued as of close of this last week, and why I personally put $1,000 into Intel stock at $49 this past week on the 17th. And I still plan on putting another $1,000 or $2 into this stock to build it into a total position of $2,000 to $3,000. And that would end up making about 10% of my portfolio. And no, that's not me trying to flex on anybody. It's just that I want to be transparent because there's a lot of fraud and deception in the finance section of YouTube, and I just want to be as transparent and trustworthy with you guys as I possibly can. So Intel delayed their 7nm chips until 2022 at the earliest, possibly 2023. And this has caused a massive sell-off in the stock, especially with the rise of AMD lately. And honestly, that's all I think the sell-off can be attributed to, is the fear of the rise of AMD, not the fall of Intel. There is a big distinction there. People are making this out to be, oh, look out, AMD is going to continue to beat Intel for the next 10 years and eventually become the leading CPU manufacturer. And I just don't see it that way. If anything, I think Intel is taking resources away from developing cheaper, more budget-friendly CPUs and putting it towards those higher-end, top-notch leadership CPUs as they typically dominate in. I think this lag of Intel not having anything new to market is just consequence of them building bigger and better chips that will be considerably faster than the competitors when it does launch, even if the price on those new chips is a tad rich. And this leads me to one of my main observations of all of my research, as well as some anecdotal experience. AMD has really stolen market share in that section of CPU buyers who are just looking into getting into the PC world or also looking for a budget-friendly option. But what about those people that don't care so much about price and are just looking for the best of the best CPUs? These people will switch to Intel. For example, my first PC build was AMD because yeah, it was cheap and it got the job done. But then I upgraded to Intel because I wanted the best of the best, and I wanted to pay a little bit more to future-proof it and squeeze out that little bit of extra performance so I wouldn't have to deal with upgrading it again for a long time. All I'm saying is that this new wave of PC gamers that are all trying to stream Fortnite and Warzone on the cheap, they're gonna come to Team Blue once that Team Red PC gets a little bit outdated, because they're gonna want that top notch, you know? No, I'm just kidding, but there is a big influx of AMD gamers because of their budget CPU offerings. And for this reason, I think AMD is a bit of a catalyst to growing the PC market as a whole, which I believe will lead to more Intel customers in the long run. I got the i7-8700 back in 2017, almost 4 years ago. And still today, the only thing that's faster is other Intel chips. And Intel reminds me a lot of Apple in that sense that you buy once, cry once. Yeah, their products are more expensive, but you really get what you pay for and can bet that nothing will beat it for a long time. And just for giggles, the only AMD CPU that comes close to performance is almost $200 more that was launched this year in Q2. Literally 2 weeks ago, and is still slower than my 3-year-old chip. AMD really struggles with that top-of-the-line individual core speed. And I know AMD really excels in multi-core operations, but the problem with AMD is it can't go core to core with Intel because they're lacking in that individual core performance, which Intel has been rumored to be kicking up several notches in the upcoming CPU release through some leaked benchmarks. Obviously, don't invest on some leaks, but whether these leaks are legit or not, I'm betting that these new chips are going to be insane, and not only keep Intel's gaming lead, but also give AMD a run for their money on multi-core processing speeds for functions such as video editing and other sort of multi-core operations. So on to AMD's recent gain in market share. Is it permanent? Or will Intel take that share back? I'm not even an AMD bear. I think they'll keep growing, but I find it very hard that Intel won't figure out these next chips and then continue to dominate in other areas of chip manufacturing like their laptop and server CPUs, and suddenly that AMD PE ratio will be looking a tad rich. I just personally have a hard time putting my money in AMD right now with their PE ratio so high, pricing in perfection for the next 5 to 7 years. It's one thing to own a stock and then that company innovates and the story around that stock changes over time and people get bigger and bigger expectations for the stock. And then there's AMD, where not a single hiccup in production, no slowdown in innovation, or no threat from Intel's chips being competitive is priced into that stock price. To me, that's a way bigger risk than the story around Intel. Plus, Intel still reported, even through this slump and lack of innovation, a 7% revenue growth on an annualized basis. So I don't know, man. I'm just saying that 80% desktop CPU market share and their dominant 95% market share in server CPUs is just kind of insane. I mean, do you know who uses Intel server CPUs? Companies with only the deepest pockets, bro. They're not building budget servers. They need the top of the line and the highest quality chips that money can buy. Companies such as Facebook, Tencent, Alibaba, and Microsoft Azure for all their cloud services. I don't think people realize just how massive Intel is. Intel's trailing 12-month revenue is $79 billion, with $46 billion in gross profit. And I'm not even down talking AMD, but just to put things into perspective, AMD has a trailing 12-month revenue of $7 billion and $3 billion in gross profit. They aren't even close in size. Intel spends almost 10 times what AMD spends on research and development. Again, not trashing AMD. I've just had flashbacks of IBM and have wondered, like, is this the peak for Intel? And then I just remind myself that Intel grows revenue every year, they grow earnings every year, they invest more into research and development every year, and they're laser focused on growth even when they're this big. And it just kind of paints a different picture when you actually look into the numbers and kind of block out all of that AMD hype and negativity around the Intel stock. And this is why I had to buy some shares on this recent dip. And I'm not one for technical stock analysis because it feels a lot like driving a car by looking in the rearview mirror, but I just can't help but notice this stark support line where investors see such value in this stock right here that they just keep buying it up at this trend line, which hinders it from dropping any lower. So that's why I personally bought some Intel stock this past Monday at $49 a share. But if you have seen my other videos, you guys know I'm a long-term, mainly dividend investor. And I see this being a great stable play, which means there's not too much upside from here. I mean, not like a double or a triple like some of my more risky plays, but I see this as easily working its way back up to the $60, $65 range and paying good dividends of 2.65%, which isn't high by any means, but is definitely appreciated by a tech company. Not to mention that they've grown that dividend every year for the past 6 years and has had a fantastic track record of dividend growth even before these past 6 years, ever since 2003. Not to mention that they also return profits to shareholders through dividend buybacks, as we talked about earlier in the video. They're doing the $10 billion stock buyback. So I'm expecting an easy 20 to 30% gain in this stock, as well as some nice dividends over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's just if they return to where they were before the 7nm delay. But I'm really being conservative with my estimate. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't quite a bit more than 30% gain in the next couple years. I don't like to try and tack time frames on gains because you just never know, but I would say 3 to 5 years from now, it's not wildly speculative that this could be a 60, 65, even higher dollar stock. And I just plan on holding this one because our world is just getting more and more devices, which leads to more CPUs, and we're becoming more and more connected, which leads to more and more servers and cloud services, which again leads to more CPUs. And if the world is rapidly growing in CPU usage, then I'll take Big Blue, which is the dominant company in the microprocessor space. But even in the worst case scenario that AMD does keep market share after Intel releases the 7nm chips, this industry is still rapidly growing as a whole, which will continue to allow Intel to grow revenues and earnings. And this actually brings me to the most exciting wild card part of Intel's business that nobody's really talking about. And that is their Mobileye business, which is actually growing pretty rapidly and has huge revenue potential and is already operating profitably. So this isn't just some speculative side project or a waste of resources, because they literally grew their revenue over 100% from 2018 to 2019. The end goal of Intel's Mobileye is to provide full self-driving hardware and software to car manufacturers and create a robotaxi fleet as a service. And yes, this sounds rather familiar. Tesla. Yeah, they're going to be competing with Tesla, which sounds pretty intimidating, but something you may not know is that Tesla's autopilot, when first launched, was actually a partnership with Intel's Mobileye, because Mobileye was ahead of Tesla several years back. And it's hard to say who's ahead now and like data lead and all that, but it's actually probably a lot closer than you think. Here's a clip of Intel's Mobileye in action.
Huge bus simply stops. Okay, so now there's occlusion. So what do? It needs to do an unprotected left. So now it's pushing its way. Now there's a pedestrian coming. You see this pedestrian, right? Moving its way. This is Jerusalem. Okay, and that's to push its way through. Okay, and
the interesting thing is that Mobileye also takes the same approach as Tesla, which is why they used to be partners, and collects data based on cameras instead of extremely expensive LiDAR tech that other full self-driving efforts have been pursuing. But LiDAR is actually getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The LiDAR option is getting a lot less expensive as of lately, so Mobileye isn't counting out the possibility of adding that to the suite of sensors yet, because while they have had great results without it, it has been reported that LiDAR is upwards of tens of thousands in cost and is projected to be cut down to the ballpark of hundreds of dollars as it rides that cost declining curve. And what about self-driving data? Tesla has over 1 billion miles in self-driving data with their whole fleet of Teslas out on the road. But what you might not know is that Intel's Mobileye also has a fleet of tens of millions, upwards of 40 plus million cars on the road with their software collecting data. I wasn't able to find the exact number of miles that Mobileye has, but with that many cars, I wouldn't imagine it's that far off from Tesla. If not, maybe more. I don't know, I wasn't able to find it, but 40 million cars, it doesn't take that big of a stretch to get to 1 billion miles. I'm just saying, they're actually a lot closer than you probably think. And either way, it's not supposed to be like a Tesla versus Intel kind of thing. I own both companies, so I want them both to succeed. Honestly, Mobileye deserves a whole video of its own, but it's hard to say whether Tesla or Mobileye will be the first to market with this service. Either way, I think it's safe to say that full self-driving will be a part of our future, so this is going to lead to massive upside for Intel in the future, even if Tesla ends up being the leader in the field. Much like Uber is the leader in ride-hailing services, it's not bad to be Lyft either, because even if Tesla is the first to market in this new and emerging industry, I can't imagine that they're going to have, much less keep, 100% market share. I just think for both of these companies Tesla, as well as Intel's Mobileye, I think it's just going to end up being something where they offer full self-driving as a service and recurring revenue, which is going to be massive upside for Tesla as well as Intel. It's not a zero-sum game, and they can both exist in that market. Basically, my point is that the future of Mobileye is not at all factored into the price of Intel, and in the face of everything I just laid out, it's very clear to me that I don't own nearly enough Intel stock. Just on a macro level, I think we're seeing a rise of AMD because of that lack of competition that Intel has left that gap in the market of those lower end, more competitive priced budget chips. But I'd imagine that once the 7nm chips are launched, then Intel should be able to not only reclaim market share, but also iterate on that architecture, and then they'll focus on being more competitive in the other chip offerings. But Intel's reputation is based on those leadership products in that higher end, and that's exactly what they're focusing on right now. I saw a weakness in the stock price, and I just had to jump on it. With all this research I've done, I am extremely bullish on Intel, especially now that I've learned about the future of Mobileye, because I think that's just going to be insane upside for the stock and their revenue and earnings, and I just think nobody's really factoring that in right now. So with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Spent a lot of time on this video, so if you did get some value out of it, please let me know by smashing the like button. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Later.